Welcome to TXOGA Talks, where energy meets insight. The purpose of this podcast is to provide you with a candid conversation about our energy needs, our energy security, and your energy future. Texas oil and natural gas have made our nation the world's energy leader, constantly innovating and investing to fuel the economy, protect the environment, and power the world. This industry is fast-paced, high-tech, and essential to improving modern life. And we're here to talk about it. You're listening to TXOGA Talks, where energy meets insight. Welcome back to another episode of TXOGA Talks. I'm joined by Shana, Joyce, Vice President of Government and Regulatory Affairs. Shana, how are you today?
I'm doing great, and I'm really excited to talk about ports.
I am as well, because when I think about ports, I think of the 4 Ps that I'm sure everyone's heard me mention before: production, pipelines, processing, and ports. And ports play a vital role because many of what we do in Texas and America today, much of what we do is spread joy all over the world. And we rely on ports for many of the products that we use in our daily lives as well. Fortunately, today we have an expert to talk to us about this, Shana.
That's right. Today we have a special guest, Omar Garcia, and he's Chief External Affairs Officer for the Port of Corpus Christi. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Shana and Todd, thank you so much for having me. It's an absolute pleasure to be joining the TXOGA podcast, to talk to your members, to talk to our peers, the oil and gas industry, and anybody that wants to learn about ports. You know, as you mentioned, Todd, in your opening comments, ports play an important role in the oil and gas industry. The Port of Corpus Christi is known as the energy port of the Americas. We're the #1 energy port for crude exports and #2 for LNG in the United States.
Wow, those are phenomenal statistics that you quoted, Omar. I want to get into those with you. Before I do, I want to tell our listeners, Omar Garcia has been a champion for a number of years. I've had the privilege of knowing him. I first met you, Omar. I think you were executive director of the South Texas Energy and Economic Roundtable. You were a big part of bringing communities and industry together as the Eagle Ford shale play really took off. And we owe you a debt of gratitude for the real leadership that you demonstrated in helping Texas benefit from oil and gas and helping those communities benefit from the jobs, the growth, and the investment. So I wanted to give you a shout out and thank you for that, what you did then and what you're doing now.
Well, I appreciate that, Todd. It was a pleasure, and it was honestly an honor to be working in the Eagle Ford Shale. That endeavor started back in 2012. I mean, that's a long time ago, right? And I held that position until 2018. Really helped a lot of your member companies and navigate through some of the issues that the Eagle Ford Shale brought upon South Texas. But as with anything that the Eagle Ford Shale continues to produce, continues to have economic development benefits, and we as the Port of Corpus Christi really appreciate all the work that you do for our customers, which also are your members as well, too.
Well, the port is not only important to South Texas, the Eagle Ford is important to the Permian Basin today. You mentioned some statistics about the Port of Corpus Christi. Can you expand on that a little bit more and just kind of describe even in greater detail why the Port of Corpus Christi is important to Texas and it's important to America?
So let me tell you a statistic that just I find so fascinating. The Port of Corpus Christi is the 3rd largest exporter of crude in the world, behind Saudi Arabia and Iraq. Think about that.
Wow.
The 3rd largest exporter of crude in the world. And that is attributed to our customers and obviously the oil and gas industry. So the Port of Corpus Christi finds itself in a very fortuitous position that we're close to the producing fields of the Eagle Ford Shale and the Permian Basin. On any given day at the Port of Corpus Christi, we export anywhere from 2.2 to 3 million barrels of crude every day. 2.2 to 3 million barrels of crude every day leave the Port of Corpus Christi. And that is because we have 4 pipelines connected from the Permian Basin and the Eagle Ford: Cactus 1, Cactus 2, the Epic, and the Gray Oak. Those pipelines right now are almost at capacity.
Wow.
They're at 90% full. So while that's a great thing, we'd also like to see them perhaps one day put another pipe in the ground so that we could export more. We have the terminaling capacity, the dock capacity. We'd love to see more steel in the ground at some point to increase our exports to our allies around the world.
That's important to know that you have the potential for growth. You're not squeezed out and constrained on space. Shane, it's amazing to me what Omar just said, that they're the third largest in the world. He didn't mention other ports; he mentioned other countries
Right.
as being the one and two
That's
position. And
right.
so that positions the Port of Corpus in a really strong position.
That's right. And let's talk a little bit about your impact on your local community, where you just gave us this amazing global fact. What is the port? How does that impact your local community there in Corpus?
Shana, I think we all remember where we were in December of 2015 when the export ban was lifted. I know where I was. I was at Steer. I was helping some of our members. Todd, you had a huge role in that, obviously. Prior to the export ban being lifted in 2015, the region, when I talk about the region, it's Nueces County, it's San Patricio County, had not seen a lot of economic growth. But with the export ban being lifted in 2015, in the last 6 years, we've experienced $65 billion of new investment from foreign companies, from domestic companies. All total, in the last 6 years, we've created 95,000 jobs. 95,000 jobs, not only for the region, but for the state. Those are tremendous statistics that this region has never seen. And there's more on the way. But I want to give the credit to our customers. It's our customers that are creating these jobs and investing billions of dollars in this region.
Well, Omar, you mentioned 65 billion. That's with a B, folks. That's a big number. In fact, that's more than the state general revenue of most of the states in America. I mean,
That's
that right there in the port of Corpus Christi, you're seeing that level of economic activity. Omar, we're proud Americans. Americans wanted to make America great again by a majority vote here recently in a recent election. We don't like exporting our jobs. We like exporting products. But when we think about, other countries sometimes that don't have our best interest at heart, sometimes Americans may think, well, why don't we just keep oil and natural gas here at home? Why are we exporting our cotton? Why are we exporting cattle? Can you describe what would happen if we did not export those products?
Well, and that's a great question. Now, we get that question a lot. I mean, what we don't want to see is we don't want to see a downturn in the energy industry, right? We don't want to see layoffs. We don't want to see reduced production in the production fields, right? We know that that the the demand for crude and gas here is slowing down domestically, right? But it's not from a global perspective. The demand for American crude and natural gas is at an all-time high. Look at the numbers that you're seeing out of the Port of Corpus Christi. Look at what the Permian Basin is producing. There are emerging economies around the world that need energy from the United States of America, and we are proud to be the conduit that for the world. When you look at the number of countries that we touch, our products go to 81 different countries around the world. That's a phenomenal statistic. But if I drill that down just a little bit more for your listeners and your viewers, 25% of everything that leaves the Port of Corpus Christi goes to the Port of Rotterdam in the Netherlands. And from there, through a very intricate pipeline, it goes throughout Europe, providing energy that Europe needs, energy from Texas. So we're very proud that we serve that role.
Well, that's a big impact on the world. And listeners, here's what that means if these exports were not occurring. The 13.3 or 4 million barrels of oil per day that's produced in America would be cut back to 5 or 6 or 7 million barrels of oil per day. And in Texas, when we're producing 43% of that, that means we would have less production. That means that almost 500,000 people that have a direct job in oil and gas would be cut. 200,000 people would be without a job. And that's what it means if we're not engaged in these exports. And you painted a real good picture of just how impactful that is globally as well.
Absolutely, it's a phenomenal statistic, and I think if you look at the future, we don't see our export numbers going down in the next 10 to 12 years. We think that we will continue on the trend that we're seeing currently.
That's good news for the economy. Shana?
Yeah, so I know that the Port of Corpus Christi is the specific port we're talking about today, but Texas has several ports right along our coastline that help contribute to our expanding economy. Can you talk a little bit about how our port also helps the state and nation, and then Texas as a whole?
Well, ports came into the forefront during COVID, right? When people couldn't get their basic supplies, whether it was the goods from Asia, whether it was the toilet paper debacle, whatever you want
That's
to call it,
right.
right?
You know, it's a
People didn't
crisis when there's
realize
a
the
shortage of toilet
That's
paper for
right.
sure. There you
people
go.
didn't realize the importance that ports had in the supply chain. And so when you look at the 19 seaports that make up Texas, each port is unique, each port is different, right? Well, we've talked a little bit about exports and crude and LNG. There are other ports that are container ports. Houston being the biggest one of them, right? Houston brings in about 5 million TEUs, 5 million containers, or above 5 million, and that's bringing products all over the world, right? To Houston, then they're distributed to all different parts of the world. So each port in Texas plays a different role. Down in Brownsville, they're primarily focused on steel. They do a lot of steel in Brownsville. Houston does crude. They do LNG, refined products. They do containers. Every port plays a very specific role. You've got Sabine Pass that is specifically focused on LNG. So it's without the ports in Texas, we would not have the level of economic activity that Texas sees. The governor has touted the last 12 to 14 years being the number one job creator. And a lot of that goes to the oil and gas industry and to the ports.
And I'll just tack on to that. Excuse me. I'll just tack on to that, I think as Americans, we are an instantaneous society. We click something online, we put it in our car and we order it. But I think you just really touched on how those products get to us and get to our door via Amazon or FedEx or UPS. And it starts with the ports, right?
It starts with the ports, and then it starts with our rail infrastructure, our highways, our interstates. It's a very intricate system to get the products from all around the world that we need here in Texas, not only to import, but also to export as well, too.
Yeah.
Two words come to mind: supply chain.
Yeah.
And that's what you all have been describing. And if there's any misstep anywhere along that route, from the seaports to the rails to the trucking, then consumers are the ones that suffer. And so good news is we've got men and women working around the clock to deliver these goods, so our stores are full when we go shopping. I don't think we mentioned, Omar, how many seaports we actually have in Texas. Do we have a number on that?
There's 19, and so if you give me if I will indulge here for a second, these 19 seaports in Texas, they're all very unique. They're all controlled at the local level. So, for example, the Port of Corpus Christi is a political subdivision of the state, but the decisions are made by our appointing body, which is 7 commissioners. And every port in Texas has their own commissioners. In some cases, those commissioners are elected. Here at the Port of Corpus Christi, they're appointed, but we all follow various chapters of the Texas Water Code. Ports have a lot of the same powers that cities have. A lot of ports in Texas tax. A lot of ports in Texas have different authorities. Ports have police departments. They have eminent domain power. So we're very unique in the way we're set up, but it's also very effective and allows us to be economic engines for our specific regions.
Well, I think the big underlying point here, there's no great port master indicating what Corpus has to do, or Brownsville, or Houston, or Beaumont. You all are out there working. You're competing. You're working with customers for growth to bring the products in and out, and it's all based on infrastructure and capabilities. And so that's what makes America great, is that level of competition. And if the Port of Corpus Christi doesn't grow and develop to meet the needs of industry, then they may build infrastructure and go elsewhere. And I think that's an important part of ports that we may not think about. And I'm really glad it's like that, because consumers are the winners when that occurs. You don't have one big government authority making all the decisions in a bureaucratic way.
So you're absolutely right, Todd. And you look at other parts of the country, you have state port authorities where you have various ports in one state, but they all report to a state entity. Here, we're allowed to control our own destiny, right? We're allowed the revenues that we generate, they stay here local. They're reinvested in the channel to make sure that we keep up with our infrastructure needs. But we have a saying in the maritime industry: if you've seen one port, you've seen one port. They're all so different.
Oh, I love
That's
that.
great. We have so much to cover, but I want to get this question in, because I think a lot of people think, we're exporting oil and gas. But why do we need to import oil? We're the biggest. If Texas were its own country, we'd be like the fourth largest producer of oil in the world. If we were our own country, we'd be the third largest natural gas producer in the world. I like the thought of being our own country, but I won't go there today. We'll keep it. We'll
That's the
keep it on
discussion for
track.
later, right?
Yeah, but I think it's important. We like to be energy independent. We don't like being dependent on anyone, but yet we still import oil. So, kind of walk us through why we're an importer of oil when we're also an exporter of oil.
Before the shale revolution, we were importing a lot of crude into the port of Corpus Christi. We were not producing a lot of crude in Texas, right? We were importing from Venezuela, from Mexico, from Canada, different parts of the world, right? And so our refineries, we have 6 different refineries here. We have Valero, Citgo, and Flint Hills, right? And a lot of those refineries are outfitted to produce and to refine that heavy crude, that heavy sour crude. We still import that crude from all parts of the world because that heavy crude, not what you're seeing, the light sweet crude in the Permian and the Eagle Ford, but that heavy crude is used for jet fuel. It's used for asphalt, which is very important in the construction industry. It's used for pet coke and other distillates. So we need that heavy crude for the industrial applications, for industrial uses around not only Texas but the country.
So in Texas, the crude we produce, folks, is a lighter weight crude. And so what our refineries are doing that were built when we weren't producing this much, they built the refineries to process the heavier crudes that were more readily available. And so now they have to blend them. And that's why we have imports and exports both. It's just science. Uh, Science gets in my way sometimes, math gets in my way of where I want to be sometimes, but physical limits really do dictate that. That's that. Thank you for clarifying that.
Yeah, and so Todd, if you look at the makeup of the port prior to the shale revolution, let's just take it back to 2015. Our largest customers were the refineries. They were importing all that crude. Their revenues were really high. Their tonnage numbers were really high. You look at where we are today. Our largest customers are midstream companies. It's the companies that are piping down the crude to the port, then export. Now, the refineries are still the cornerstone of the port of Corpus Christi. Make no mistake about it, right? They're still some of our largest customers. But there's been a shift in the way that the port, and if we look at our revenue, we look at our tonnage, a lot of that now is midstream companies.
Well, it's one of the P's, the four P's. They all work together. And I, you mentioned the shale revolution. So just to reflect back, prior to 2010, most wells in this country were vertical wells, up and down wells. The shale revolution brought tested and trusted technology to bear to drill horizontal wells. So it's horizontal drilling combined with hydraulic fracturing that can be done in a safe way that protects our water quality and that is done with a high level of accountability, ushered in the shale, this rock formations that oil and natural gas is trapped in. This horizontal drilling and hydraulic fracturing is what unleashed these volumes that has made us the biggest producer in the world today. That's good stuff.
So let's talk a little bit about crude oil. We'll continue that conversation. In 2017, the Port of Corpus became the first crude oil export facility to receive a VLCC, which is a very large crude carrier. Can you explain to our listeners what a VLCC is and why that's such an important milestone for the port?
Absolutely, Shana. So a couple of things there. So there's different vessel classifications. The VLCC, as you mentioned, the very large crude carrier, can hold 2 million barrels of crude. That is a lot of crude that is destined to the international market. Um, the next vessel class below that is the Suez Max, which can hold about 1 million barrels. And then you go into smaller ships that can hold, 500, 600, 700,000 barrels of crude. But the two biggest ships that we see in the Port of Corpus Christi are the VLCCs and the Suez Max. So when you can get a bigger ship, the economies of scale work best to ship from the Port of Corpus Christi. Here's the irony. The VLCCs need a draft of 75 feet to fully laden vessel. No port in Texas has a 75-foot draft. Ironically, the only port in the country that can fully load a VLCC is Long Beach, California. The great state of Texas cannot fully load a VLCC. So the port is undertaking a channel improvement project. It is the biggest project in our 100-year history. This is a project to deepen and widen the ship channel to go from a depth of 47 feet to 54. At a depth of 47 feet, you can load a VLCC depending on the spec to about 1.2. With a depth of 54, you can go to about 1.5. But what happens is you still have to take a smaller ship out into deep water in the Gulf of Mexico. Those ships park side by side, and what they call reverse lightering. The smaller ship tops off the VLCC to get them to 2 million barrels.
Okay. I've actually been on a tour of the Long Beach port, but when do you think that you'll have your ship channel widened to accommodate a VLCC?
So we will never get, I don't think you'll see a port beyond 54 feet. The
Okay.
economics to dredge are so high. We will have our channel improvement project completely done third quarter of next year. So our
Oh, wow.
36-mile channel will be the depth of 54. So that is a project that took 30 years to get completed. This is a project that started in 1990. Think about where you were in the early 1990s. From I remember, the Cowboys had a winning Super Bowl team, right? Now,
Oh, that's
30,
painful. That hurts
Oh,
you.
let's
I
not
know,
talk
but
about the
you're a Cowboy
Cowboys.
fan
Oh,
like me, so
oh, oh.
I had to throw that in, Todd. But um, you look at the project was authorized several times in Congress. In 2011, the project cost was 188 million. You 2020, that project cost was 680 million, of which the port put 220 million dollars of its own money to complete it, while never levying a tax and never
Wow.
passing that cost to its customers. We took on that responsibility because we wanted to show to the market that we were going to have a deeper draft port, and we wanted those pipelines pointed at the port of Corpus Christi to export that crude. So again, third quarter of next year, we'll have a 54-foot draft channel.
That's amazing. What you now for our listeners who are listening online, there was a boat that just passed you in the back. You can see the Port of Corpus Christi behind you. Can you still see that boat? I was just wondering what it was.
Let me turn. Oh, that actually is a tug.
Okay,
It
that's
is
what
a
I
it is
thought. I
a
saw
tug.
the tires on
It
it.
is a tug going out into Corpus Christi Bay to escort probably a tanker into the channel. So you have to have two tugs on those vessels to make sure that that ship doesn't lose any steering, that it continues to maintain a speed and power, that it goes safely to its dock.
Yes, because I'm assuming that safety is of the utmost importance in the Port of Corpus Christi, as in other ports.
Oh, it is one of our highest priorities. We have a robust safety system, but not only us, but each one of our customers, everybody that works at the Port of Corpus Christi, safety is our number one priority.
Awesome. Well, thank you for that
Ladies and gentlemen.
sidetrack.
No, that's
Okay.
good. That's good. It makes me sit here and think, folks, if you're planning a vacation with your family and your kids and you haven't been to Corpus Christi lately, you really need to put that on the list of consideration. Not only are there a lot of fun things to do, the Texas State Aquarium and other things in Corpus, but to show your family the economic engine that is driving Texas that you can just see in Corpus Christi and the port and the level of activity is really phenomenal. And it's a good educational opportunity to have fun and to learn something all at the same time. I know we're running up and needing a break here, and so I want to get one quick question in before we do, Shana. I, you know, Omar, you mentioned earlier, I think 81 countries or something like that that y'all export to from the port of Corpus Christi alone. And so when I think about that, I think about, well, things are great in America. We're rocking along. We're taking care of our business. But what happens to activity at the port of Corpus Christi when you have global events in these other parts of the world? Do you guys feel that directly? We talked about supply chain backing up. Does that impact the port of Corpus Christi when global events kind of get off track?
Absolutely, and there's two events that we can point to in recent history. Number one was COVID. We all remember when oil was trading at a negative, but
Mm.
that was not a fun day at the port of Corpus Christi, right? Because so much of what we do is tied to the oil and gas industry. So we monitor what's going on in the markets, what our customers are doing. We're not going to deploy our capital if the market doesn't dictate, right? We look to make sure that there's going to be growth. We want to deploy our capital with our customers, right? If there's a growth opportunity, we're going to deploy our capital with our customers. But certainly, COVID had an impact. Luckily, it was a short-lived impact. The crude kept flowing to the port of Corpus Christi. We're a vital component of national security. So the port never shut down during COVID. I mean, we did see a loss in revenue for a few months, but we quickly made that up. And then the second thing that I would touch on is the war in Ukraine. And what happened there is, Cheniere being our number one producer of LNG, all of their LNG was pointed towards Asia and Europe. When the war in Ukraine started, all of those ships started pointing towards Europe. That was a drastic shift in what one of our customers had to do because of a global effects, or a global crisis, if you will. So we're not immune to what happens at the global economy. I mean, this is a global port. We used to be kind of a regional domestic port. Now we're a global port. So what happens globally could impact what happens to the port of Corpus Christi.
I want us to talk about Shana when we get back about LNG
Let's
and
do it.
when we get back from our break.
That's right. So we'll take a quick break to hear from our week's sponsor, and then we'll come back and explore some more topics. The Port of Corpus Christi has been in operation since 1926 and has become the nation's largest energy export gateway and the third largest export port for crude oil in the world. The port boasts a 54-foot deep channel, 3 Class 1 railroads, including BNSF, CPKC, and Union Pacific, and a location adjacent to connecting Texas highways Interstate 37 and Highway 181. With these assets at their disposal, their mission is, and always will be, to leverage commerce to drive prosperity for Corpus Christi and the coastal bend by serving as the energy port of the Americas. To learn more, visit portofcc.com.
Welcome back, and thank you for tuning in again to TXOGA Talks. Before we left for a quick break, Omar, you mentioned the Cowboys, and you and I are both lifelong Cowboys fans. Hope springs eternal. It's been rough with the injuries, and hopefully things will get straightened out before too long.
Absolutely. Well, I think they'll be. I'm predicting a couple of wins the next couple of weeks. We'll be
There
okay.
you go.
Okay.
I'm on board for
I
that.
like this Cowboys optimism today.
I don't want to go into my Aggies, and it's just man, big plans, big plans.
We were headed for a big matchup the last game of the season, but South Carolina kind of changed that a little bit. But we'll see.
I was actually in Columbia for that game. It was not pleasant, folks. Southern hospitality stopped when we got to the football field. It ended there, but it's a great state, good people, and I love my friends. But I wish my Aggies would have done better. That's for sure. We know what is doing good, and we know what's changing the landscape of the world, and that's LNG, also known as liquefied natural gas. Now, if my memory serves me correctly, Omar, Cheniere exported the first commercial cargo from Texas at the Port of Corpus Christi. That was in 2018. Secretary of Commerce Wilbur Ross was on hand, and I was there. You were there. We had a great time. And just how big of an event was this, not only for Corpus, but for the world?
That was a milestone for this region. And the impact that it's had on the world can't be measured. But that was a $15 billion project. And Cheniere picked the Port of Corpus Christi because we had a deep draft port, we had skilled workforce, and we had an abundance of natural gas in our backyard right here in Texas, right? And so that was a huge win for this region. The appetite for LNG globally remains strong, whether it's in Ukraine, other parts of Europe. Asia remains a huge market share for LNG. You see what's going on in Brownsville with Next Decade. That's going to come online in the next couple of years. So LNG is going to be here for the foreseeable future. But what I can tell you, Todd and Shana, while in 2018, we had the groundbreaking for Cheniere, they are finishing their most recent expansion this year. They are growing. Cheniere is adding additional, they add capacity by trains. They're adding additional trains to the facility here. So you're going to see more exports of LNG from the Port of Corpus Christi early part of next year.
That kind of growth is phenomenal. We've got growth there in the Port of Corpus on LNG. You've had pipeline expansions. You've had refining capacity that is exporting refined products around the world today. Shana, with all this level of industrial activity, sometimes consumers, rightfully so, have concerns about our environment, what's being done there. And I think those are important issues.
That's right. We talk about that a lot. We feel like our operators do a lot to ensure that they're following regulatory policy, and I think regulatory certainty helps to ensure that you build extra trains, right? Like you just talked about, Omar. And we also talk about the environment and what are they doing to be environmental stewards. So, can you talk a little bit about the awards that the port has earned when it comes to environmental progress?
So the port has received many accolades for our environmental initiatives. I mean, we have a dedicated environmental team at the Port of Corpus Christi that is led by our Chief Strategy and Sustainability Officer, Jeff Pollock. He oversees an environmental team that they're focused on 6 environmental precepts, and those are air quality, climate adaptation, uh, water quality, habitat restoration, and soils and sediment. This is huge for this region. So I'm going to point to a couple of things. As we continue to dredge, a lot of those dredge spoils, we put them back in areas that need nourishment along the beach. When Harvey came, it destroyed a lot of islands that some of the wildlife depended on. We put those dredge spoils back on that. That's habitat restoration for us. But the biggest impact that our customers working with the EPA, with TCEQ, with our environmental department is keeping Texas crude out of Texas water, right? And so when we've got the largest Texas State Aquarium, the largest marine wildlife aquarium in the state at the entrance of the ship channel, 95% of their exhibits, their tanks use salt water. That salt water is taken directly from the ship channel,
Wow.
directly behind me. That is a huge testament to not only the Port of Corpus Christi, but our customers and their environmental stewardship. There's no better example of the environmental focus that our customers have than touting that our water is clean enough that the aquarium can use it for their exhibits.
That is an
That's incredible.
excellent example, Shana, of how we don't have to pit the economy against the environment or vice versa, that we can enhance and grow both. And I think, Omar, the fact that the Texas State Aquarium, the official aquarium of Texas,
Yeah.
takes water right out of the bay there, that all this industrial activity is going on, is a tremendous example of stewardship that excels and goes beyond the basics to make certain that we're taking care of our environment. That's a great example. Thank you for sharing that with us.
Absolutely.
We could go on and on with you. We may just have to have you back, or we need to come in person and then do an
Yes.
on-site podcast there where we can maybe sit up outside. I know the background is it's a bright day in Corpus today because we can barely faintly make out the ships passing. That'd be a great picture.
You know what I want to do? Let's plan this. Let's do one of these shows on the Lexington, overlooking the bay, and maybe have a ship come in, time it when a ship comes in. I think that'd be fantastic. We could get that done.
I'm
That's
into
been on
that.
my list to do in the last. I've wanted to do that for the 6 years I've been at the port. I've wanted to do that. So Todd, let's get that done. We'll plan that. Maybe the spring before it gets too hot, we can do that.
Sounds like a great plan, and we'll catch a fish off the Lexington too. We'll
Absolutely.
do it. How about that? Everything
Absolutely, we can make that happen.
Well, we appreciate you so much, Omar, being with us today. You really brought to bear some important facts that the reason that Texas is the great state that it is, the reason that people are moving, 1,000 people a day are moving into Texas. And you pointed out why Texas is now the 8th largest economy of the world, the types of activities that are occurring right there in the Port of Corpus Christi.
Thank you, Todd. Appreciate you and Shana.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Omar. Thank you, Shana. This is a big part of our Texas economy. It's been fun today.
Well, as a reminder to our listeners, visit TXOGA.org to learn more about all things oil and natural gas in Texas. Be sure to follow us on LinkedIn, on Twitter/X, Facebook, YouTube. We're everywhere. And make sure that you subscribe to our podcast so you don't miss an episode. Thanks again for being with us, Omar.
And folks, if you want to give us ideas that you want to hear about, you just let us know and we'll be certain to work those in. But for now, thank you for joining us for another episode of TXOGA Talks, where energy meets insight.
The views expressed on this podcast are not intended and should not be construed to be the views of any particular TXOGA member or company. The purpose of this podcast is to engage in candid conversations about energy needs, energy security, and the future of energy.